Good afternoon and welcome to the Sports Related Concussions and Youth Football Address. As your executive, again, I welcome you to our annual off-season meeting in Atlanta. Usually I would open with something that would make everyone smile or laugh, but today's topic is not the place for that. This issue demands your attention just as much as mine and is as important for all football players. Currently, as the National Football League Commissioner, there has been numerous changes to the way we play the game to improve and better protect players from concussions when in-game contact occurs. The issues I will present to you have brought serious concerns to my eyes and must be changed right away to save future football athletes. Today I will bring to your attention the different issues seen in youth football games, and they are as follows. How concussions happen, how they can be prevented with new helmet technology, what is known about the short and long-term impact, and the medical and return to play guidelines that should be used when such injury occurs. Concussions can be a life-altering injury to many players, including youth football players. Concussions occur very often throughout sports, but more often than not in football. Most of the time, concussion injuries can occur from a single blow to the head where two helmets come into contact with one another. Concussions are very prevalent in football, and they will not go away unless something is done about it. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is a concussion? A concussion is a neurological injury resulting from a blow to the head or body which causes an alteration in mental status. When players are concussed during a game, they usually have the following signs and symptoms: headaches, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, and balance problems, fatigue, trouble sleeping, drowsiness, sensitivity to light or noise, blurred vision, difficulty remembering, and difficulty concentrating. Over the last decade, concussions in sports has become a significant health concern in the public eyes. The Center for Disease Control labels a concussion as a silent epidemic. Over 300,000 concussion cases have occurred each year. So you may be asking, well, how do we try to prevent concussions and reduce the amount of concussions that occur, even though we can't prevent them all? Over the years, we have changed helmet technology in the NFL, and this can be a very beneficial step for youth football organizations and new helmet technology that can decrease concussions. As we all know, the brain is a very delicate structure, and it should be surrounded with as much protection at all costs. In contact sports like football, helmets provide a solid protection, keeping the force that is sent to the skull after a blow to the head. However, lessening the force isn't the only problem with concussions. After each play that involves a minor to serious blow to the head, waves of kinetic energy are sent directly to the skull and enters the brain. This is caused by the impact of two moving objects with heavy force like football players. Therefore, changes to helmet technology used to protect football players will enhance the protection for players who receive repeated head blows during football games. The engineering team from the University of Michigan decided to approach a project called Head Health Challenge 3. This program was promoted by the National Football League and the National Institute and the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. The overall objective in the program was to come up with new and improved technology for sports players who participate in contact sports and to better protect those players from sustaining a concussion when they come into contact with another force of impact. The team decided the helmets needed more padding on the inside of the helmet. Therefore, they decided to use a material called viscous elastomer for the innermost layer. This material bounces back to its original shape after a player receives a blow to the head from a defending player and causes the helmet to deform. In a sense, the foam takes the blow and not the head itself, lessening the chances of a concussion. Compared to other helmets, only 1/5 of the kinetic energy from an impact made it through to the head. The design is now one of 5 finalists in the Head Health Challenge competition. What makes this team and their continuous improvement so good is that they are always looking on ways to improve many types of helmets for other sports like rugby, hockey, as well as football, and protecting players from concussions. The team plans to continue their experiment with different types of polymers in the next year, creating safer equipment for youth and professional football players. This will lead us into the next topic, which is short and long-term impact of concussion and concussion injuries. After a player takes one or more blows to the head, more than likely that player will suffer a serious concussion injury. The long-term effects of a concussion are permanent brain injury or death. Permanent brain injuries that lead to death have increased over time in the NFL from 1997 to 2006. During that time period was 50 cases of permanent disability and 38 deaths due to cerebral injuries at all levels of play and 2 to 3 months post-concussion injury. Therefore, a player with a history of one concussion has an increased risk of having more concussions in comparison to a player who has never been concussed. Dr. Ann McKee, a neuropathologist who assessed 202 former NFL players who sustained a concussion and are now deceased to determine if there was the presence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy present in their brains. Of the 202 players, 177 at the age of 66 years old was neuropathologically diagnosed with CTE. However, the age for those diagnosed with mild CTE was 44 years old, and those who had the presence of severe CTE was 71 years old. Moreover, the most common cause of death for players with mild CTE was suicide. Next, second most common cause of death for players who had the presence of mild CTE was other, and the third most common was neurodegenerative. Don't worry, there is a such thing called short-term effects from a concussion. The most common short-term effect is lengthened recovery time. Most, but not all, football player concussion symptoms can last as long as 10 days or even months after. Sometimes they can persist for a year or more depending on the severity and the amount of concussion sustained in a football player's career. What you should be looking for as a parent are the signs of headaches and fatigue, which can last for years. If these signs continue after the 7 to 10 day time period, it's recommended that you see a physician right away to receive the proper steps to care for your child. Young males 10 to 19 years old had the highest rate of sports concussions. Also, high school players have an annual risk of concussion of 5 to 10%, and the risk is higher during gameplay in contrast to practice. In order to protect youth football athletes from permanent damage after concussions, medical and return to play guidelines are needed to evaluate players after making a determination if it is safe to allow each player to re-enter the game. This is done by having a trained neurologist on the sideline readily and available to determine that guidelines each player falls under after sustaining a concussion. There are many different guidelines that can be used. Any trained medical staff, such as athletic trainers or neurologists, can perform all of the tests I will present to you. The first common guideline recommended for return to play is called SAC, which stands for Standard Assessment of Concussion. This system was developed in line with regulations laid out by the American Academy of Neurology in response to the recommendation for the development of a standardized policy with which concussions can be assessed on the sideline right after they occur. The standardized assessment of concussion consists of 4 components: orientation, immediate memory, concentration, and delayed recall. Validation studies revealed that SAC was accurate in determining if players was concussed or not. Use of SAC can precisely spot mental status changes related to sports-related concussions and help in the diagnosing and management of concussion injuries. The second recommendation I present to you for return to play is the utilization of the baseline and serial post-concussion assessment. The baseline serial concussion assessment is used to document pre- and post-concussion from each player. This assessment is more detailed and includes more complex tasks than the sideline assessment or any other screening measure. This type of assessment allows for a sideline medical staff to determine if an athlete's concussion symptoms have subsided. This usually occurs within 7 to 10 days post-concussion. Most importantly, having medical staff and a certified neurologist on the sideline to conduct pre-concussion and post-concussion tests on the sideline allows for a comprehensive approach to spotting a concussion and appropriately documenting each one. My final recommendation to make for return to play is the use of computerized assessment. This system is the best approach to assessing sports-related concussions for many reasons. One of the reasons being it offers an objective approach to the administration of concussion tests and scoring the assessment. Next, the biggest reason being time and cost effectiveness, as well as having accessible personnel to perform concussion tests. Lastly, if players move around to different teams, the information can be easily transferred to the next team through the database. Now there are only 3 computerized testing systems available, and they are immediate measurements of performance, cognitive testing, and concussion resolution index. Any of the above computerized testing systems can be used by a neuropsychologist to effectively identify the presence of even the mildest concussive injuries. One of many problems youth football organizations have are allowing players to re-enter the game after taking a blow to the head. According to Purcell, young athletes require more time to recover and have more significant neurocognitive consequences of concussion. So how do you prevent youth football players from placing themselves in this position? Just like in the NFL, medical and trained athletic supervision are placed on the sideline. Currently, during youth football games, there is no medical supervision present to prevent players from re-entering the game after suffering from a concussion in youth football. Youth football athletes are at higher risk for brain injury. Each athlete is different and many respond in different ways. So many recover in a few days, and some may take days or even weeks to 2 months to recover. However, the decision of return to play must be taken cautiously and individualized depending on the athlete. The most accepted protocol for any players to return to play is stepwise insertion protocol, which is recommended by the Concussion and Sports Group. Within this protocol, each player that recovers at rest must go through the stepwise progression of increasing exertion. In the stepwise exertion protocol, each player must remain symptom-free for 24 hours after each step, and if he or she remains symptom-free, they can progress to the next step. However, the progression must be medically supervised. If any athlete has any recurring symptoms, they must rest for a period of 24 to 48 hours before attempting to progress through the exertion protocol. Next, return to play decisions will include several variables such as nature of the injury, history of previous concussions, and physical and cognitive function. If a player is diagnosed with a concussion, he or she is held out of the remainder of the game. The player needs physical and cognitive rest to allow a possible resolution within 7 to 10 days following the concussion injury. If a player doesn't recover within 7 to 10 day window, they must undergo a neuropsychologist test. If the player is symptom-free after 7 to 10 days, they must enter the stepwise exertion protocol to be fully cleared to return to play. If the player passes the final test, they may return to play. In closing, I really believe this would be a workable solution to many concussion injuries. If we can express our thoughts about the problem and can convince youth sports organizations that this is very dangerous and that youth age players' lives are being dramatically changed by this game, we can make a difference. We can also protect players' lives, but also keep this game around instead of having to lose football forever. Finally, having your child take a stand by choosing to play other sports instead of football will be a wake-up call for youth football organizations.